All right, so good afternoon and welcome to the first webinar, part of Daily Maverick's Masterclass series, which is aimed at helping corporates and businesses transform their operations to be more sustainable. But this isn't going to be about throwing around buzzwords or engaging in greenwashing, because that would actually be very awkward because I often write about how businesses are guilty of being of greenwashing. But we're actually here to have a real, honest conversation about making meaningful changes in how businesses manages their waste and sustainability efforts. And today's focus specifically will be on waste management. I'm Julia Evans, a climate and biodiversity journalist at Daily Maverick. And today we have the privilege of being joined by two people who have years of experience working with the private sector. We have Ashley Deploy, who is the CEO of the E-Waste Recycling Authority, which is a not-for-profit producer responsibility organization. So his organization plays a crucial role in South Africa's extended producer responsibility regulations, which hold producers accountable for managing the waste generated by their products. Ashley's work focuses on ensuring that companies meet their obligations by financing the extraction, collection, recycling, and disposal of electronic waste, which we'll call e-waste today, helping to create a more sustainable waste management system. And then we're also joined by Noel Shaw, who's wearing my shirt and we look the same. And he's a New Zealand native with over 30 years of experience in project and facility management across Southern Africa. So over 2 decades ago, he founded Umlingo Management Services, which focuses on corporate social responsibility and environmental efforts, with a special interest in uplifting disadvantaged communities through waste valorization. His extensive work during the last 10 years in Cabo Delgado, Mozambique, includes waste management strategies for multinational companies like Total Energies, as well as advising municipal and provincial authorities on community-driven recycling initiatives. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. This is an interactive session. It's not just a lecture. I'm in Joburg today and it's my favorite weather. It's overcast. So grab a cup of tea or coffee and come join us for this discussion. I have my Seattle and it's really awkward because my dad got me a non-reusable cup. So please don't cancel me. You can blame my dad, Neil Evans, and not me. And let's just jump in. Please remember that the chat is open if you guys want to send any questions. I really encourage you to send questions and I'll actually be impressed because it'll show that you're focused. So the first question I want to ask is to Noel. What responsibility do private companies have in making their businesses more sustainable? Like, why should it be their issue to sort out?
Thanks, Julia, and thanks for having me. Well, actually, I believe it's everybody's responsibility. And basically, companies or corporations are just made up of lots of everybody's. So we all have our individual responsibility, and we need to honestly look at if we have a problem, what is it? Agree what it is, identify, measure, and then we can manage. So with the company, they also have the corporate social responsibility. There's a lot of buzzwords, sustainability, but obviously environment, economic, and social sustainability is how the world is going to survive. The benefit a company has is the old German 19th century philosophy Gestalt, which is a group is more powerful than the members it's made up of. If I'm just explaining this to people, I liken it to a home game of rugby. The crowd all has the same, for that period, has the same mission and vision. So I firmly believe that in order for a corporate must find its vision, find its purpose, find its problem. But they do this, everybody it must start from the very bottom. There actually should be a meeting of everybody in the business. Everyone must buy in, and if you've got the same mission, you can go forward with Gestalt and solve whatever problem you decide you have.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That's a really good opener. And Ashley, what do you think about the term greenwashing? Do you think some companies are guilty of it? And how do we avoid it?
I suspect there's a lot of greenwashing, and I'm not sure how we avoid it. But in my experience, if I may relate it directly to what I'm doing, we have regulations that says to all producers of electronics that they have to take responsibility for the products at the end of life. And this regulation is only 3 years old. So what, in my experience, there have been many companies who take or appear to have a progressive posture on their products and their environmental footprint, but in reality, when it comes to meeting their obligations, they're nowhere to be seen. So I do think that there is greenwashing. I wouldn't be able to quantify it, but in my own experience, I know that there are hypocritical corporations who, on the one hand, say they are doing something. The least they can do is have a waste management plan, as they are required by law. So that's the very, very least that they can do. And so, yeah, there's a set of statements on the one hand, a lot of big ESG statements, and in reality, very little.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, I think today I don't want this to be some sort of surface level discussion that, promotes greenwashing. I know like ESG is such a big thing at the moment, but I can also understand from a company's perspective that they need to meet these obligations, but they also have their own like outputs they need to meet. And at the end of the day, they're a company that needs to turn over a profit and pay salaries. But I think what I'm excited to discuss today is that and we were discussing this earlier with Noel, if you shift kind of the whole system or the whole business model, it's not just environmentally sustainable, it can be economically sustainable. And it doesn't mean that you're going to have to lose money. You could even make money, and it can be better for your business as well, which I think is really cool. And I wish more businesses would understand that. So let's start with integrated waste management. So when you think of waste management, you often might think of plastic recycling, but there's so much more to that, as we're going to discuss today. There's electronic recycling, but there's also so much food waste, which contaminates material waste and also would contribute to food security issues, which is a huge problem in South Africa. So Noel, in Mozambique, you worked with an international corporate processing. We process upwards of 10,000 kgs of food waste per month from accommodation camps and kitchens, along with relative garden and bush clearing, where you involved 20 community members directly in the process and benefited 100 market gardeners with ecological organic agriculture training and enhanced crop production. This sounds amazing, and I'd love to chat to you about it. But how important is it for individuals and companies to take responsibility for food waste? And then can you give some advice on how they can do it?
Okay, quite a question. Firstly, I think we shouldn't separate food waste from total organic, because together they make a great compost. You need the nitrogen from your food waste base. This is very basic science, and the carbon from ground clearing, bush clearing, whatever, and that's what we put together up in Mozambique. Actually, we did a pilot project for Total Industries, part of their waste minimization, environmental, and then community development. We did a 2-year project for about 2,000 people to see if we could plan ahead for when they have up to 20,000 people building up there. And what we found was there's a lot of statistics about how much food is wasted. For instance, it's kind of accepted in the US that 40% of total food is wasted. That's whether in going rotten in transport or whatever. And there's a general one I found a few years ago, and it looks quite accurate. It's a European study where they found that in the first world canteens, restaurants, etc., preparatory waste amounts to about 140, 150 grams per person per meal. So that's half of 500 grams a day per person. So we found that quite accurate when we did the operation up north. But effectively, you can't separate just food. You have to separate everything. Waste is holistic. You got to treat it holistically. Like I always say, it's like a pizza. You can't just deal with one piece of the pizza unless you have the whole pizza, if you bake the whole pizza. So the whole plan is you identify the waste, You're going to have to separate it. Once you separate, you can decide what is reusable. You can measure it, and only once you can measure it, you can manage it. So taking that, the basic plan is, my theory is, what I used to say in Cabo Delgado to the people in training is lixo, dinero, cadogo, cadogo. Now, lixo means rubbish, dinero means money, and cadogo, cadogo means little by little in Swahili. So you pull out, identify. Tin, lixo, no, dinero. Plastic, no, lixo, lixo. So you end up, in a simple manner, you end up, all of this is reusable. All of this is not reusable. So what we have to get rid of the non-reusable stuff. And until we identify it, and this is the very basics, and it works in rural Mozambique, it works in city of Georgia, it works anywhere. People have to be able to identify. They mustn't feel defensive about the situation or guilty. I mean, I believe it's not irresponsible not to have a solution, but it's irresponsible not to want one.
No, I completely agree. Yeah, we're not here to try villainize people. And I always say to people who even question me as an environmental journalist, like, oh, do you have an electric car? Or like, how could you possibly buy anything that has any sort of plastic? I'm like, until you provide people with accessible alternatives, it's just pointless to villainize them. That's not the point. So yeah, I really want to chat more about that. But before we get there, I also want to bring in e-waste, which actually is the expert definitely in South Africa. So e-waste, electronic waste, this includes small things like cables, e-toys, e-cigarettes, batteries, LED lights, blenders, radios, even massive stuff like solar panels and batteries. And we all have so much e-waste in our households, and obviously businesses will have tons of e-waste. But actually, why is it important for us to recycle e-waste? Like, why can't we just leave it in our drawer?
Yeah, thank you. Very good question. E-waste contains, often it's a very, very complex waste stream. Phenomenal amount of materials and mixed materials goes into e-waste. Some of it has value, and quite a bit of it doesn't have value, and is toxic to the environment. So it's very important because we're all hoarding e-waste, and we found this out last year. We ran probably the single biggest information campaign in the country around e-waste. And over 2 days, we tested the hypothesis that people were hoarding their electronic waste. And within 2 days, we had over 13,500 people get off their backsides and collect their washing machines and their phones and everything. And we collected 164 tons of electronic waste just over 2 days. We were going to run it over 4 days, but the interest became beyond what we could manage. Just from a security point of view, the number of people who turned up. And so we all tend to do it, but that electronic waste has valuable fractions that get extracted through proper recycling. Also, some of that waste can be repaired, or the used electronics can be repaired. And that is one of the objectives that we're trying to achieve, is to extend the life of electronic goods. And also, it's really to put the electronic waste into a system where we're going to take careful custody of that waste and shepherd it until all its benefits have been extracted and until all its negative components have been safely managed and kept out of landfill. We've all seen television screens broken by the side of the road, cables being burnt, and so on. So it's growing at 4 times the rate of solid municipal waste globally. So you can imagine if by 2040 each person is going to have on average 25 connected devices. That is what 250 billion devices, connected devices. So we're looking at mountains and mountains of electronic waste that's being generated. And yeah, the sooner we extract that, the sooner we and some of the materials in the waste is also needed for production of new products. So for example, some of the waste gets smelted into aluminium ingots, and these get used by the motor industry, the aerospace industry, etc. So there's quite a lot that is required. There's another term, it's also called above ground mining, pulling out the valuable materials, the materials that can be used in new applications. But key is also just to ensure that the negative fractions, the harmful fractions, don't impact people's health and their environment.
Yeah. And just to explain, because I definitely didn't know what this meant before I started researching this for an article we did together. What is extended producer responsibility? Could you just explain that in simple terms?
Extended producer responsibility, we have a regulation, a formal regulation that now guides that, and not only guides it, demands it, that all producers of electronic and electrical equipment and lighting and batteries take responsibility for the products that they put in market. And so the extended producer responsibility regulations or EPR is a mechanism whereby producers of electronics come together. So in our case, we have almost 70 members. They come together and they pay what is called an extended producer responsibility fee or an advanced recycling fee. And so through an agency like ERA, we are able to then put down infrastructure for the collection of electronic waste. We're able to support small enterprises that are getting involved in the collection and processing of electronic waste. So in a nutshell, what we are called, ERA, is a producer responsibility organization. And what we do for our members is put in place the infrastructure and the mechanisms and systems for managing their waste when their products come to the end of life.
So companies who would produce, let's say, like a microwave, they need to provide the funding to extract and recycle the materials for something like that, right?
That's correct. Because essentially, I mean, it's been encapsulated in earlier environmental legislation where the polluter pays principle was established, and government considered that those people who are putting product on the market must take more responsibility for what they put on the market, whether they are using recycled materials or recyclable materials. So there's a demand that there be less toxicity, less complex materials, more recyclable materials, etc., etc. So essentially, government is just saying you need to keep this out of our landfill, and you've got to take responsibility for what you've put on market.
Yeah, I remember when I first told one of my friends about this, and they were so shocked, and they were like, why would it be the producer's responsibility? Surely it should be the buyer's responsibility. But I guess my thinking and what you've explained is that if it is expensive to deal with that waste, then companies by default will stop producing products that are more part of like the circular economy, I suppose. Is that sort of the thinking?
That's exactly the thinking. The thinking is that you take responsibility for your product. There's also a notion of eco-modulation, and what we're trying to encourage with the regulations is that you produce more eco-friendly products, products that have a longer lifespan, products that can be repaired, etc. And yeah, so it is essentially building a circular economy, keeping as much of the materials in circulation, and also keeping or finding solutions for the harmful materials. It's one of the things we do. We have very complex plastics on most electronic equipment. Those complex plastics cannot be recycled. They tend to end up in landfill. So we've got to find applications for that, or glass in the solar panels, or the battery waste, etc. So there are a number of big complex waste streams that come out of e-waste that we've also got to find solutions for.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And like Noel was saying, it's not just about one certain type of waste, it's the whole system. Like, for example, this cup, which again, not good that I have this. It's you can't really recycle it because it's mixed material. So there's this plastic lining around the cardboard. So cardboard you could recycle, but because of this plastic lining, so a lot of South African recycling companies don't have the technology to separate this, so this can't even be recycled. But if Seattle Coffee Company like demanded that everyone had to bring their own mug, or produced cups that genuinely could be recycled, that would be much more effective. I completely agree with that. I just want to touch on community involvement because we have a question here. So Noel, this is to you. How important is it to involve the local community in waste management projects? And how do you get businesses and residents on board with reducing waste? And we have a question from the audience, JB. He asked, or she, sorry, do we have online communities or sites where we can collaborate with companies in need of alternative waste solutions?
What was the first question? How do we get communities involved?
I know, I always give you such tough questions. Yeah, how important is it to involve communities, and how do you get businesses and residents on board?
Well, absolutely essential. And we've found ways to do it in big cities, city of 200,000 people, or rural areas. Even in fact, we had the interest of managing. I didn't realize till it had happened. We started waste management. There wasn't a city then when there was wealth coming in northern Mozambique. Waste was produced. There wasn't waste. There wasn't begging. There wasn't anything. And then suddenly it all appeared. So the way anywhere to deal with waste is firstly honesty, responsibility, and then value. You have to be honest about the situation. You have to choose to be responsible. Then you have to give it value. You have to find value in the waste. As simply as a big problem is illegal dumping. So what the municipalities do, they go and pick up when there's illegal dumping, everyone goes, wow, wow, look at all the rubbish. So they go and pick it up and take it to the landfill. So what happens next in the community? They say, oh, just put it there. The council will come and get it. Our process, which we've implemented in places, is we put in localized recycling sites. So we have an education program at the schools, show the children how to make toys out of tins or whatever, just so they have an awareness. Whenever they see rubbish, they may not see rubbish, they may see opportunity. Then, of course, we have buyback centers for the metals, etc. And then identify the single use. And to give that value, we introduce swap shops, which are where children can bring waste and swap for, you're semi-sponsored, you can swap for school stuff, pencil case, even school bags or whatever. Girls can get hygienic projects and stuff. Sometimes you have a nurse there from Doctors Without Frontiers. But the whole thing is to create value and interest. And the swap shops work amazingly. Then we have composting, so we take the food waste. Schools end up with gardens. If you do all this, you get an interest. The moment no one has an interest, everybody's embarrassed, even municipalities. You question your municipality, a simple, very unobtrusive question, they will swerve because none of them are dealing with waste responsibly, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, just quickly on municipalities, Bram from the audience asked if municipalities are included in the corporate space. I assume not, right?
No, a big important thing to me is what I try to involve is public-private partnerships. So you get a corporate, okay, when I say corporate, I mean everybody, everybody who's in the business has decided this is what we want to do as our business. And then you try and form a public-private partnership. So you separate the responsibility from the municipality. They still have some financial responsibility and they have to find funding and have to do it. But once it's in the public-private partnership, it's more successfully managed, I believe. The books are open and there's no way it's going to wander off to somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah.
My drift.
Yeah, well, you definitely have to work together. But I just wanted to go down a little bit into more practical sense, Noel. So for a company who is just starting out, or actually it doesn't matter, even if they're existing, and they're feeling overwhelmed about how to deal with this, what would you say is the first few steps they could take to perhaps identify their waste and then begin managing it?
Okay, I'm sorry to repeat myself, but the first thing I would do is have a meeting of everybody to discuss what they think is waste, what is a problem, whatever. And then I would look at predicting what is our waste going to be? What are we doing? Are we a manufacturing company? What waste are we going to be generating as part of our business? Are we textile scraps or what? That's a separate waste. Industrial waste. What are we using? What are we bringing into the business? This is where procurement comes in handy. What are we bringing in that's packaging? I mean, we used to be happy with getting things in a paper bag. Now we can't buy things that are packaged out of existence. What are we bringing in? And then what are we creating? What are we creating, say, domestic waste? Company, it depends how big you are, catering, cleaning, what are people bringing their lunch with? It sounds very simple, but it has to be, because there has to be a paradigm shift to how we look at it. Every single thing that's going to landfill or to incineration has to be treated the same thing, the same way. And that's how I say a new company has to look at it holistically and get buy-in from everybody. And it's really not hard. It's really not hard. It's just taking that shift. I say with this, people are so busy jumping to conclusions, when we can take a leisurely stroll.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it takes the pressure off things as well. No, that's great. And then just going back to e-waste quickly. So someone asked if e-waste ends up in, sorry, it's Azil. They asked if e-waste goes to the landfill site. Obviously, Ashley, you will respond properly, but ideally it wouldn't go to the landfill site. But I just also wanted to ask what advice you'd give to businesses who want to reduce the e-waste but don't have big budgets.
E-waste is banned from landfill sites, and so they shouldn't end up there at all. But it does, and obviously you're not going to find heavy metal structures in the landfill. It's going to be largely the no negative value or low value fractions. So we have, through our partners, there are buyback centers that are located close to the landfill sites. And so when people do extract materials from the landfill sites, they're able to trade it with those buyback centers. But ideally, the thinking currently is to set up materials recovery facilities close to landfill sites. And also one of the imperatives of the EPR regulations is to set up systems for the separate collection of electronic waste so that it never comes close to a landfill site. The second part of your question, if you don't mind reminding me.
Yeah, just advice you'd give to small businesses on how to deal with the e-waste if they don't have big budgets.
Yeah. I mean, there are PROs like ERA. So there are different infrastructures for different waste streams. So at the moment, we have collection bins, drop-off bins at macro sites, Builders Warehouse, Pick n Pay. This is only our second year of operation effectively. So
Mm.
we have already 97 collection points, 13 buyback centers. Quite a phenomenal growth we've had in
It
our
is.
first year of
Yeah.
operation. And so
I
this is,
just want to add, there's another PRO organization that also has drop-off bins and at Woolworths, which
yes.
is also good. Like individuals like me and you can also drop off our
Yeah.
e-waste, should really be dropping off our e-waste there as well.
So there's certain waste streams that those bins accommodate very well, like domestic appliances, ICT, etc. What we've also done with those bins is to find slots for lighting waste. That's also obviously banned from landfill. But then there are things like solar panels, and so it depends on the nature of the waste stream. Solar panels, batteries, that can't really be accommodated in those receptacles that are available to the consumer.
Okay.
So those are new infrastructures that we having to put in place with obviously the EPR fees that we collect. So it would depend for a business that has got the kind of e-waste that I was speaking about. You can use the drop-off bins, or you could arrange with us through one of our service providers to have your electronic waste collected. And then really maybe the really simplest immediate solution would be to say, hold it, gather it, and make an effort to take it to a buyback center or a drop-off point, or call in and have it collected.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's great. I wanted
But there's
to
something really, really important. If a business is trading in electronic products, the absolute fundamental requirement by law is that they must have a compliance scheme with the EPR regulations. It can be an individual compliance scheme, or they have to set something up, because we're only at the beginning of developing an
yeah,
ecosystem around the management of electronic waste. Really,
yeah.
at the beginning, we are hoping that 10 to 30 years from here, we're going to have a humming, well-organized system with a lot of SMME participation, informal collective participation, and
Yeah.
hopefully a lot more local solutions for those waste streams.
I mean, it's really crazy because we have so much electronics, but it feels like this is like a brand new thing for people. People have not even heard about this. Judy Bell in the audience asked, why is EPR not being actively enforced and implemented? I mean, you can speak to that now, but by law, companies do have to have their own policies and deal with their waste, right? But I suppose it's new and people are just getting away with it. Like, what's happening?
Really good question. Those who are not participating, there's a term for them. They're called the free riders. And government has already issued notices. So a number of producers well, let's put it this way. There are probably between 3,000 and 6,000 producers of electronic products in the South African market. Less than 10% of them are cooperating with the law. And there have been numerous discussions. So you can be assured that government has issued notices to companies that are not cooperating and not complying by joining or forming an EPR scheme. And it's really a message that I would like to, if I may use this platform, to get to chief financial officers, environmental consultants, and audit companies, that if they do not make a provision for the EPR fees in their financial statements, that they are at best negligent, and at worst, committing fraud that they are meant to recognize, because it's law, in the same way that if you don't pay your VAT, it is law, it is new law, it's 3 years old, and government is definitely coming for those companies that are not participating. And we've seen that already. And the threat is that they will be ordered to stop trading in the South African market. So I've heard companies say, well, this is like e-tolls, it will just go away, etc. But the longer they do not comply, the more their liabilities are growing. So I can understand why the CFO and the environmental consultant and so on don't want to draw attention to the fact that there is a growing liability, but it is something that's going to catch up with all of those people that I've just mentioned, because they're obliged to put that into their balance sheet.
Yeah, no, it is part of the law, which is
Yeah.
crazy that there's only 10% compliance right now. But I'm just thinking, like, if it's a company that doesn't produce electronics, but any company nowadays has company laptops, printers, all these things, what responsibility do they have? Because let's say I work for a company and all the company laptops are Dell. So Dell is required to pay for the waste management of that, right? But then my company is required, if that computer is like finished now, to make sure that that ends up in the right place and not in the landfill, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're interestingly using Dell. Dell is the superstar when it comes to EPR. They have had Dell representatives have been working in the South African market for almost 2 decades now, tracking the EPR regulations, tracking the developments, and made advance payments to get EPR set up. And you may have noticed that our last campaign that we had this year was with Dell and the Springboks, through whom we reached, again, almost 15,000 active participants. Dell made available some laptops as prizes. And the question around in that campaign was going further from last year. Last year, the hypothesis was there's stockpiling. Let's get the stockpiles out. And we've proven that in spades. This year, the question that we've asked with Dell and the Springboks is, what is e-waste? Why are you, should you be managing e-waste? And then we've run another campaign with Cartoon Network and Warner Brothers, where again, thousands, tens of thousands, if not millions of young people on the African continent have been exposed to the question of electronic waste. So we've opened this question up to the public in a way that has never been done before. And I think that gives us a good set of conditions around which we can now build that circular economy in electronic waste. So yeah, Dell is actually one of the pioneers of EPR in South Africa, and a lot of companies, and it's not, you asked the question about greenwashing. You will see that their participation in EPR and their own company's ESG vision, their 2030 vision for net zero waste, they fit very well together. This is exactly an example of a company where there isn't greenwashing, and then you would have the opposite where, and they probably wouldn't tend to be compliant anyway, those that are greenwashing.
Yeah, it's crazy because it's such a big thing, but I feel like we don't even think that it's something that we need to recycle or it's part of that. But those materials can be so dangerous. So it's not just about environment, it's also about safety. So, and also like the billions of dollars actually a year that are lost from all of those materials that could be recycled. Especially now that renewables are hopefully growing more. It's something we're going to have to think about. But there's so many audience questions, so I just want to get some of them. Noelle, hopefully you can speak to this. Lucas asked, how can we help companies producing disposable nappies to be responsible for their products? Because in the area that Lucas stays, he's just seeing them everywhere.
That's a very good question. What I will refer to, and also what what Ashley was saying, there are technologies now. Now,
Mm.
I'm always say I'm not a very bright person, but my best asset is finding bright people. So I have very bright people I can get information, which I believe I have a professor from university who's probably the foremost organic agriculturalist in Africa. So any eco-organic agriculture when I've made compost. I have an old colleague who's probably foremost in waste technology in Africa. He's busy speaking at a keynote address as we speak now. So he tells me there's so many technologies that can deal with the problem, because we have to deal with it somewhere, not pretend it's not there.
Mm.
Pyrolysis and things, burning without oxygen. And there's a lot of technologies. South African, there's one called Scarab Tech, which the South African company really advanced, everything made of stainless. What happens is people tend to buy things from overseas and it's not remade. Well, that just becomes rubbish as well. And as well as not being sustainable, they're not environmentally friendly, they're not clean, they're not safe, but they're everywhere. I'm sure you know what I'm referring to. But there are technologies being put forward and being practiced and being worked. Plastic roads are real, plastic bricks with 50% glass and 50% single-use plastic. The problem they always strike is ulterior motives, laws and regulations that have been set up for people with other agendas. You've got the concrete industry, you've got whatever, you've got the packaging industry, and they all point out, oh, yes, you close this, what are we going to do with all these 80,000 employees? So at the moment, my idea most realistically is let's use these technology, let's try and deal with the situation as it is, and then work towards totally reducing the situation. It's a long haul. But like I say, Kidogo, small steps, we can do it bit by bit.
Yeah.
But like I say, those technologies are there. And if anyone I can email me if they want any particular reference to any of them.
Okay, great. Well, we'll get the Daily Maverick chat to drop your email in the chat if you don't mind, because there are quite a lot of questions that I'm not sure we're gonna have time for, but it's really great to see so many people engaging in the chat. Just briefly on the technology, Ashley, what sort of new technologies or solutions make it easier to collect and recycle e-waste?
Yeah. So the real big problem fractions is mixed plastics from electronic waste. So when you have mechanical processing, when everything is sifted and the high value is sifted out, you end up with mixed plastics. So there are two possible applications at this stage. One is as a brick additive, building materials additive. And the other is the putting it through a pyrolysis process for the extraction of crude oil that can run things like ships and furnaces. And in fact, one of our partners has just set up or has been approved a pyrolysis plant, and they're looking at taking those mixed plastics through there, and also another partner looking at additives for bricks. Similarly, another difficult fraction is the solar glass, the glass on solar panels. That's also being used as brick additives. So there are investments being made now in dealing with that. Another is on batteries, and lithium-ion batteries, a highly hazardous product. So there are at this point solutions for the shredding of that and the chemical processing of the black mass that comes out of batteries. Then the innards of a fridge, a refrigerator, those are difficult materials. So those now can be extracted. And again, one of our partners has set up a HIPS plant. That's what it's high impact materials inside the refrigerators. So those are some of the key difficult waste streams that we have to deal with. But we also, I mean, if you look at the EPR fees, how we apply it, so besides the collection bins and the buyback centers, we are talking to municipalities to see how we can assist them with that. We're obviously running awareness campaigns just so that we can have better control and custody around the flow of electronic waste and for people to be aware of its benefits and drawbacks. But then also in SME development, we're currently working with 65 people living with disabilities. And they are dismantling. Well, they're firstly repairing what they can. So they've got training in repairs. And then dismantling the waste that the used goods that have really come to the end of life, and then they trade that with buyback centers and other facilities buying that. So so the solutions are not only technological, the solutions are also in contributing towards job creation and enterprise development.
That's incredible. It is interesting to hear about how these technologies work, though, because obviously, if you're not exposed to it, you would have no idea. But Noel, I wanted to chat to you about this a little bit more in terms of companies producing food waste, and it ties into a question Jeremy asked. Of course, we can't just go to the shops with our woven bag and, you know, have some loose onions. I wish it was like that, but every food, like most food, comes with plastic packaging. So Jeremy asks, how do we deal with bulk food packaging? This is a major input into restaurants, etc., which they have little control over. And he knows that packaging does not impact the shelf life of food items. So is this something that you could speak to?
I don't know how one can say we have little control over it. We have purchasing power.
Okay.
We should say this is what we want, you know, en masse. We accept, and it's obviously understand that life is fast and people are running around, and so it's much easier to go to Woolworths and grab something that's packaged. And funnily enough, those clear plastic, most of those clear thin plastic things in Woolworths are recycled. But the only thing that's economically viable now of the plastics, but there's far too many of them. Effectively, it's not environmentally, it's not economically viable to recycle unless you initially take responsibility that waste management has a cost. Now, people in the old, you know, and with this misinformation and disinformation all around the place, people tend to believe what's easiest. I compare it to a fruit bowl, if you excuse my analogies all the time. A fruit bowl, for instance, in a fruit bowl, what's the last fruit that you usually have left in your fruit bowl? Okay. I think it's oranges.
Yeah, true. Actually, something with
okay. Now, why? Because oranges take a bit of work and a bit of time, like the truth. You can't just walk past and grab a social media banana and carry on. You have to stop, think about it, and then the truth. So, what was the question again?
Well, I think it's just like companies or individuals feel like they don't have control over purchasing food that has a lot of wrapping. But you were speaking about the fact that we do have purchasing power. But what can we do? Do we have to put pressure on like companies like Woolworths? And is there a better sustainable alternative for food producing companies? Or like if a company is hosting like a big event where they have to feed 100 people, like you've worked with companies like that in the past. What did you recommend to them in terms of that?
Well, as far as that, we have reusables, but something like Woolworths, let's pick on Woolworths. If you can do with some inconvenience and stop going there, that will soon change their attitude to any supplier. But it's going to be inconvenient if you know, so it's up to you. You're going to put up with inconvenience and change, or you're just going to shut up and let it carry on. Those are our individual choices. We can make those.
Yeah. So if it's like a restaurant, where would they buy their bulk ingredients from? That would be better. Obviously, they're not buying Woolworths anyway. That would for a restaurant.
I live in George, and in George and Wilderness, we have a lot of restaurants, and we have a lot of fresh produce shops. So I'm always seeing the restaurant, even if they sort of maybe 3 or 4 days a week are getting their vegetables.
Yeah.
We don't have to accept situations. The thing that's changed takes effort and responsibility. Like I say, if you don't like the packaging in a shop, the only way to stop it is not go there. And they will soon say, why aren't you coming in? "Oh, because we want you to make your packaging sustainable." That is the
Yeah.
only way they're going to change.
No, it's very true. And Salisha asked, I'm not sure if this is something you could speak to, but it's quite interesting. She was saying that biomedical waste from research labs and hospitals is difficult to reuse and recycle. However, the waste generation is significant. Are there alternatives or treatment options? I don't know if this is something you'd have experience with.
Yeah, I have. Basically, it for safety and for health, etc., it's got to be incinerated. But nowadays, as I referred to pyrolysis, which Ashley did as well, there is pyrolysis technologies. We can do it as safe as, in the safest possible manner. They're available now, and they are being used at hospitals and labs and landfills.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
best we've got. That's the best we've got at the moment, and I think there's much lower hanging fruit.
Yeah, yeah. We only have 10 minutes left. So before we do our closing thoughts, I wanted to ask, in terms of practical sort of economic sense, Noel, maybe we can start with you. How can changing your model to be more sustainable and reducing waste also help boost economic opportunities and potentially profits for businesses? Is that possible?
Yes, like I was saying earlier on, you can show waste management to be cost neutral. If you put in and say, right, our general cost, if we have to take this and get the municipality to do it at a responsible landfill, it costs X amount a ton. Okay, but if we do this and we reduce on-site localized reduction and we sell this on, and the way you do that is by creating a small business. You bring in someone from the community and educate them into a small business so they do your waste separation management. You've already reduced it. So your whatever's going to go to landfill or incineration, and a responsible landfill is not the worst option nowadays. So once you've done that, you can go forward with minimal waste, and then you've got a marketing thing. This is real. This is not misinformation or disinformation or social media. This is real pictures we can show you of these people we started up with our waste management. We're now reducing our waste by that. That has to have a marketing value for you.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not greenwashing. I mean, to have something that's not greenwashing, that has got to have a dollar value for the chief financial officer. Reputational, feel good, staff feeling happier coming to work. It's all a value. So if you consider it like that, it just makes so much sense. It's crazy that we can do it.
Yeah, and I love that a lot of these solutions uplift local and disadvantaged communities, which is perhaps like quite altruistic, but I mean, like you said, it could boost morale and it would boost the local economy as well.
Well, that's how I started with this. I used to build resorts for a big you'll know them, a big international or South African company in remote areas. And being from New Zealand, I brought up environmentally friendly, socially friendly, etc. So I soon learned that, okay, the big boss wasn't going to we're going to take this tons of waste somewhere. So I thought, what can we do with it? And also the local community are now here, we don't have jobs. So this sort of came up over the last 30 years, that you educate the local community, use the products, you make a lot of compost. Gardening now becomes sustainable and concentrated. It just goes on. They become aware when their children grow up, they grow up into this situation. The corporates are happy because it's, like I say, they've got the intrinsic value of taking waste to landfill, but now they've got all this stuff that means something and that has an intrinsic value.
Yeah,
And like, you know, it's the
exactly.
opposite of greenwashing.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I love that you have so much experience with that. And it must have been really eye-opening for you to come into South Africa. I really think that conservation sometimes seems like conservation and obviously sustainable development sometimes is seen by a lot of South Africans as a privilege that they can't afford. But for me, I feel like it can be the key to uplift a lot of people, as cliche as that sounds. And if we have like legal policies like we're speaking about today, companies are required to do that, and it could just help everyone. It would be amazing. Ashley, do you want to speak a little bit before you also wrap up with some closing thoughts about how e-waste management could improve efficiency and reduce costs, or if that is true? I mean, obviously they've got to put some money down to deal with it, but I mean, long term, could it improve efficiency and reduce costs?
Well, I can't exactly answer that, but what it can do, effective and sustainable e-waste management, is reduce a company's carbon footprint. If one, when it starts in the production process, paying attention to what is going into the product, and also when it comes to its end of life, what can be extracted from that product usefully. But as Noel has said, with channeling the electronic waste into the proper streams, into proper custody, there is a lot of job creation potential. As maybe I should just give you one practical example.
Yeah.
The program here in Cape Town, where we are working with 65 people with disabilities. Those people have been trained. They are earning a stipend. They are selling the goods they've repaired. And then also they are fixing their neighbor and their family's equipment and earning additional income. So there are a lot of upsides to companies taking responsibility for the e-waste. Also, by law, there's an obligation for all companies to take back their products. It's covered in the Consumer Goods Council Act. It's covered in the EPR regulations. So what the extended scheme allows companies to do is really to say, yes, I'll take my product back, but here's the infrastructure, put it here, put it there. And then let's feed that into an economy that generates materials, that saves our environment, and also generates jobs.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
incredible. I love that example. But you're so right with reducing carbon footprint, that would long term reduce costs, because South Africa has carbon tax, but now with the climate change bill, which just got signed into law, we also have something called carbon regulation. So companies and businesses have a certain greenhouse gas budget that they're allowed to emit with their production. And if they go over that, they have to pay additional carbon tax. So you're just going to end up paying more with that anyway. A lot of people, environmentalists, and then also people in the private sector have issue with these systems either way, but it's going to cost money to have a bigger carbon footprint. So yeah, it just goes back to, I think, the circular economy and making things more sustainable from the get-go. I think there was a lot of questions in the chat about how to make EPRs more compliant, because obviously it's such a big non-compliance. Unfortunately, we don't have time for that today, but maybe I can do a follow-up article, or you could email Ashley. But I just quickly want to do some closing thoughts. Noel, what is a takeaway you want people listening today to know?
Like everything in life, I guess, honor, acceptance, honesty, responsibility. The information is there. Like I say, it might be an orange. You might have to peel it, and there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation. But if you want the correct information, it's available. So it is your choice. It is definitely your choice how you treat the environment and how you treat the future. And everybody is responsible for their own actions. So That's effectively what I
Mm.
what I think my message would be.
No, I love that. I mean, also, if you've started a business, a lot of those things are in your control. And what is really the purpose of your business if it's going to have such a negative impact on your local economy and your environment? We shouldn't, I suppose, have to convince people too hard on that. Ashley, is there any closing thoughts you would like people to know?
Yes. I mean, one is to direct people to our website, so www.eranpc.co.za, because obviously there's a lot more around the question of e-waste, and really to directly to the consumer to say, you know, check in before you check out. There are companies whose products are on the shelves. So you have the irony of a Macro or Pick n Pay who are paying their EPR fees, and sitting next to their products are other products that have ducked the EPR fees. So the law says all PROs must show their membership and show what is being contributed by those companies. So really just to say to the consumer, as Noel is saying, make conscious decisions, decide whether you want to buy a product from a company that is flagrantly disregarding these regulations and their obligations, or whether you want to support a company that is participating in growing a circular economy through EPR.
Yeah. No, there's definitely like a lot to think about, even as myself. I obviously work in this space, but there's a lot of takeaways that I'm going to mull over today. I'd just like to thank everyone who joined today. It's been such an engaging chat, and I always feel so impressed. I say this every time, but I'm just genuinely impressed that people take an hour out of their workday to have such an enriching conversation. So that's pretty cool. And thank you so much to our panelists. I think these are some of the best people in Southern Africa to speak to on these issues. So it's really a privilege to have you guys here. I think the Daily Maverick team's gonna hopefully drop your organization's links in the chat below. Otherwise, I'm sure you can Google it. And you can also reach out to us if you need their contact details. But yeah, it's been a very interesting chat, and there's a lot to think about. We have a lot of power as consumers. I think that's also important to remember. So yeah, thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day and a
Thank
lot to
you.
think about.
Brilliant.
And yeah, I hope that it was a good conversation for everyone. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Julia.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ashley.
Bye.
Thanks, Noah. Nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you, brother. We'll be in touch.